morning and a warm welcome to Daybreak. I'm your host, Katie Wilson, here to take you through the top stories. Let's see this morning's headlines. President Trump signals possible Iran deal amid ongoing talks in Strait of Hormuz tensions. Israeli airstrikes hit southern Beirut for the first time since last month's ceasefire. And Russia warns diplomatic missions to evacuate staff ahead of possible strike on Ukraine. Thanks for joining us this morning. Our top story: diplomatic efforts between the United States and Iran are continuing as tensions remain high over the conflict and Tehran's nuclear program. The latest remarks from Washington have added fresh attention to the possibility of a breakthrough in the talks.
US President Donald Trump said on Wednesday he expects the war in Iran to end quickly as the United States seeks a deal over Tehran's nuclear program and the Strait of Hormuz. He also said that the US had held very good talks with Iran over the previous 24 hours, adding that a deal between the two sides was very possible.
All of a sudden, they want to make a deal badly, and we'll see if we get there. If we get there, they can't have nuclear weapons. It's very simple, but what's not to submit? So they had a Navy with 159 ships, and now every ship is blown to pieces and lying at the bottom of the water. They had an Air Force, lots of planes, and they don't have any planes. They don't have any anti-aircraft. They don't have any radar left. Their missiles are mostly decimated. They have some. They have probably 18, 19%, but not a lot by comparison to what they had. And their leaders are all dead. So I think we won.
His comments came as reports emerged from US media that Washington and Tehran could be nearing a one-page deal to end their war. The memo reportedly has 14 points and, according to US news outlet Axios, could serve as the basis for wider nuclear talks. The measures under discussion include suspending Iran's uranium enrichment, lifting sanctions, and restoring free transit through the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian officials say the proposal is still being reviewed. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai said Tehran will study the offer carefully before responding through Pakistani mediators. Senior Iranian lawmakers also warned that Iran is ready to respond if tensions rise further, unless the United States makes major concessions. Despite ongoing talks, President Trump warned military action could resume at a much higher intensity if negotiations fail. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister says Israel remains in full coordination with Washington, adding that he speaks with President Trump almost daily and that both leaders agree all enriched uranium must be removed from Iran.
We share common objectives, and the most important objective is the removal of enriched material from Iran, all of the enriched material, and the dismantling of Iran's enrichment capabilities. President Trump believes he can achieve this one way or another. However, we are prepared for any scenario. And that is the directive I have given to the IDF and our security agencies as well. Israel is stronger than ever. Iran and its proxies are weaker than ever.
In the meantime, oil markets remain highly sensitive to developments between Washington and Tehran, with any rise in tensions around the Strait of Hormuz likely to push energy prices higher and add pressure to the global economy.
All right, let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe. And we begin with that Middle East story and Al Jazeera. As usual, they've got a live page running on the developments in the war. Trump says the deal with Tehran is possible and Israel bombs Beirut. There's what they're leading with. So President Trump has said he's had very good talks with Iran, adding that it's very possible we'll make a deal. Iran's foreign ministry said a US proposal to end the war is still under review. Now, as Al Al Jazeera mentions here, overnight Israel struck Beirut for the first time since the ceasefire with Hezbollah. And if we scroll down a little bit more to the latest developments, we have had reports in the last few minutes of a drone attack in southern Lebanon, which has injured 4 Israeli soldiers. So we'll have the latest developments on there across Al Jazeera, and we'll probably get more information there throughout the morning. So absolutely stay tuned to that for the developments in the Middle East. And we're going to head over now to CNN, who are paying tribute to the media mogul Ted Turner, who pioneered the modern 24-hour news culture. When he launched the CNN channel, he has died at the age of 87. Now, in 1980, Turner launched Cable News Network as the first dedicated rolling news channel, which soon became a central part of the media landscape, including us. We're part of that. And current CNN CEO and chairman Mark Thompson has been speaking in tribute and has described Turner as the giant on whose shoulders we stand. And even President Trump, as we see here, a fierce critic of the current CNN, has paid tribute and described Turner as one of the greats of the broadcast industry and a friend of mine. So lots of tributes pouring in there, but of course stay tuned to CNN, which will be central to that. But we're going to head over to Reuters now. As preparation is underway for the 70th anniversary of the Eurovision Song Contest. We're seeing there the preparations in the host city of Vienna, and this was always going to be tainted with controversy due to Israel's participation. Now, police in the host city are bracing themselves for protests, including blockades and disruption attempts. This year, 5 national broadcasters, including Spain's, Ireland's, the Netherlands, are boycotting due to Israel's participation and the war in Gaza. Now, the EBU, that's the organisers of Eurovision, they say the contest is a non-political cultural event. But of course, we've got that precedent there that in 2022, Russia was banned from the competition following the country's invasion of Ukraine. Now, rehearsals are currently underway for Eurovision, and the grand final is set to take place on the 16th. So I'm sure more developments there will come across this week and next week. But we're going to head over to sport news now and ESPN, because we now know that Paris Saint-Germain will be facing Arsenal in the Champions League final. As reigning champions, PSG will be hoping to hold on to their title after they beat Bayern Munich with a 6-5 aggregate yesterday. If you haven't seen that 3rd-minute goal from Ousmane Dembele, set up by Georgian Kvaratskhelia, I would certainly recommend you watch it. Now, of course, Arsenal will be going in confident to their first Champions League final for 20 years. But there is no escaping the fact they face a mammoth task on the 30th of May in Hungary. PSG are going to be wanting to retain that crown they won so brilliantly by beating Inter Milan 5-0 last season. Now, ESPN analysts, their money certainly seems to be on Paris Saint-Germain. But what about you? What are your thoughts? Can Arsenal do it, or will they be finishing second once again, as we know they love to do? Let us know your thoughts on all of our social media platforms. I would love to know who you will be backing in Budapest. Now, to finish off, I'm going to go to the BBC for a heartwarming story about a 90-year-old woman from Jersey who has been reunited with the descendants of a former Soviet prisoner of war who her family hid during the Nazis' occupation of the Channel Islands. Dulce Le Breton says Uncle Tom, as she called him, was her main memory of the war. But after the liberation of the Channel Islands, Tom was sent back to the USSR, and the family did not hear from him since. But that is until now, as BBC Russian and BBC Uzbek tracked down his family in the far east of Uzbekistan and arranged a video call between them and Dulce. And after learning of the story, Uzbekistan has posthumously awarded John and Phyllis Le Breton, I think it's going to pop up in a few moments, one of the highest state awards for their courage and compassion. So a really heartwarming story there, and there's a social media video as well if you haven't seen it, but I'd really recommend you take a look at that, as it certainly made me smile. But that is your press review for this morning, and after the break I will get the rest of the global stories for you.
and welcome to Prime Time. What a show we've got lined up for you today. In a complex world, clarity is power. Two hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Prime Time with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News.
The global defense industry plays a vital role in ensuring national security. In Turkey, companies in this sector strengthen domestic production and enhance military independence.
ISA-based radar, Murat radar. This is fully digital radar. This is new for world. Aselsan today, Turkish technology leader and global technology provider.
Yaptığınız atışa hazır. 3, 2, 1, ateş. Hedef imha edildi.
I'm Nuray Mustafa. This is One on One.
Unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. One important note.
To Fierce.
I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Welcome back, you're watching Daybreak. Now, let's have a look at the global stories. An Israeli airstrike has hit the southern suburbs of Beirut for the first time since last month's ceasefire, raising fresh concerns over the stability of the truce with Hezbollah. The escalation comes as tensions continue across the region despite ongoing diplomatic efforts to contain the conflict.
Tensions remain high across the Middle East as Israel continues its operations in Lebanon. Airstrikes hit southern Beirut on Wednesday, marking the first attack on the Lebanese capital since the ceasefire came into effect last month. The escalation comes amid wider diplomatic efforts to ease regional tensions, including ongoing US-Iran negotiations. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the target was a commander from the Radwan force, an elite unit of the group. In a joint statement with Defense Minister Israel Katz, he said the operation was intended to prevent future attacks on Israeli troops and communities. Israeli media report the commander was killed, though neither the Israeli military nor Hezbollah has confirmed his death. Earlier, Israel issued evacuation warnings for several villages north of the Litani River, raising concerns of a possible expansion of military operations deeper into Lebanese territory. Lebanon's Prime Minister Nawaf Salam says it is still too early for high-level talks, with diplomatic channels between the two sides remaining limited.
The United Nations is warning about the growing impact of renewed violence in Lebanon as Israeli strikes and evacuation orders continue to affect several parts of the country despite an existing ceasefire agreement.
Becca, we once again reiterate that civilians and civilian infrastructure must be respected and protected at all times. This is forcing further displacement of civilians already impacted by months of hostilities.
French President Emmanuel Macron has called for the immediate reopening of the Strait of Hormuz after holding talks with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. Macron called for restoring freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, warning that its closure is disrupting global oil flows and stranding vessels. He urged Iran to pursue diplomacy and said he will raise the issue with President Trump as tensions continue to affect global energy markets. Well, as battlefield tensions escalate across Ukraine, Russia has issued evacuation warnings to foreign embassies in Kyiv. It comes ahead of Victory Day.
Russia warned foreign embassies and international organizations in Kyiv on Wednesday to evacuate personnel, saying retaliatory strikes could target the Ukrainian capital if Victory Day events in Moscow are disrupted.
A note with the following content was sent to all diplomatic missions accredited with the Foreign Ministry and to representations of international organizations. I quote, "On May 4th, 2026, the Russian Defense Ministry issued an official statement in connection with threats by the Kiev authorities to strike Moscow on a date sacred to all Russians, Victory Day in the Great Patriotic War. The Russian Foreign Ministry strongly urges the authorities of your country, the leadership of your organization, to treat this statement with the utmost responsibility and to ensure the advance evacuation from the city of Kiev of personnel of diplomatic and other missions, as well as citizens, in view of the inevitability of a retaliatory strike by the armed forces of the Russian Federation against Kiev, including centers of decision-making, should the Kiev regime attempt to carry out their criminal terrorist plans."
The warning comes as fighting continues despite rival ceasefire proposals linked to Russia's May 9th commemorations. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russian forces violated Kyiv's proposed truce more than 1,800 times within hours of it taking effect, with attacks continuing along the front line and in civilian areas. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha, meanwhile, accused Moscow of focusing on securing the parade rather than advancing peace efforts. As clashes intensified, a Russian strike hit a kindergarten in Ukraine's northeastern Sumy region, killing 2 people. Officials said no children were inside the building at the time of the attack. The United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission says Russian attacks across 14 Ukrainian regions since last Friday have killed at least 70 civilians and wounded more than 500 others. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry says its forces captured 2 settlements in the Donetsk and Sumy regions over the past 24 hours, while also carrying out strikes on Ukrainian military positions, drone facilities, and energy infrastructure across 141 locations. Moscow further claimed its air defense systems intercepted 571 Ukrainian drones, while the Black Sea Fleet destroyed 4 unmanned boats. Ukraine's military, meanwhile, reported 177 clashes along frontline areas and said its forces targeted Russian command centres, assembly points and air defence systems.
Health authorities across Europe are monitoring passengers from a cruise ship linked to a deadly hantavirus outbreak. The vessel is now heading to Spain after several evacuations and 3 confirmed deaths.
The cruise ship MV Hondius, hit by a deadly hantavirus outbreak, has left waters off Cape Verde and is heading to Tenerife in Spain's Canary Islands. The vessel has nearly 150 people on board and is expected to arrive within 3 days. 3 people, a Dutch couple and a German national, have died during the outbreak. According to the World Health Organization, 8 people are suspected to have contracted the virus, with 3 confirmed through laboratory testing. Spanish authorities say the 14 Spanish passengers on board will be quarantined in a military hospital in Madrid for up to 45 days, depending on possible exposure to the virus. Other passengers without symptoms are expected to return to their home countries after the ship docks. 2 seriously ill passengers were evacuated from the vessel and flown towards Europe for specialist treatment. During the transfer, 1 aircraft carrying patients to the Netherlands was denied permission to refuel in Morocco. The plane was later redirected to Gran Canaria, where officials reported a problem with a patient's life support system while awaiting another aircraft. Health authorities are now investigating how the virus spread on board the ship, which began its voyage in Argentina and travelled through remote parts of the South Atlantic.
Poland's defence minister says there can be no NATO without the United States, as Warsaw signalled its willingness to increase the presence of American troops in the country.
There is no NATO without the United States. If anyone today tries to imagine the North Atlantic Alliance functioning in such a way, it simply isn't possible. But there is also no US power without its participation in NATO.
A US federal judge has released what is described as a handwritten suicide note allegedly written by the late financier Jeffrey Epstein. The document, made public on Wednesday, includes a line suggesting it is a treat to be able to choose one's time to say goodbye. That's a quotation from the note there. Though officials have not verified its authenticity, the note is said to have been discovered in 2019 by Epstein's former jail cellmate and was released following a court request by the New York Times. Epstein was found dead in a Manhattan jail cell in August 2019, with authorities ruling his death a suicide while he was awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges involving minors. Cuba has condemned recent US remarks hinting at possible military action, calling them dangerous and a violation of international law. Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez blamed decades of US sanctions for the country's deepening economic crisis. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the situation in Cuba is unacceptable and signaled possible action without any details. Rising pressure from Washington, including limits on oil supplies, has worsened food shortages and triggered widespread blackouts across the island. A US indictment accusing several Mexican politicians of alleged links to the Sinaloa cartel is creating divisions inside Mexico's ruling Morena party and increasing pressure on Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. Sheinbaum has criticized what she described as US interference, saying the evidence shared so far is not enough to justify arrests or extraditions. The allegations have also exposed divisions within Morena, with some party figures rejecting pressure from Washington, while others see the case as a chance to address corruption inside the ruling movement.
Somos libres.
Foreign ministers from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations have met in the Philippines ahead of the 48th Leaders Summit, with the Middle East conflict high on the agenda. The talks were held in Cebu under the Philippines' chairmanship. Manila said the conflict has disrupted energy flows, trade routes and food supply chains, while putting Asian nationals in the Middle East at risk. Talks are also expected to cover the South China Sea Code of Conduct, as tensions between Manila and Beijing have grown, but expectations for progress remain low.
In the implementation of the 5-point consensus.
Iran is calling on FIFA to ensure equal access for all teams ahead of the World Cup in the United States, Canada and Mexico. The comments come after members of Iran's Football Federation were reportedly turned back at the Canadian border last week, while Federation President Mehdi Taj had his visa cancelled over alleged links to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
We will make every effort. Look, our national football team is not traveling to the United States. Rather, we are going there to take part in the FIFA World Cup. Therefore, it is FIFA's responsibility to provide all the necessary facilities and conditions. Host governments also have a very clear obligation under FIFA regulations to provide the necessary arrangements and issue the required visas without taking political considerations or motives into account. We hope that FIFA, if only for the sake of preserving its own credibility, will certainly take the necessary measures.
We're going to go to a quick break now, but when I return, we'll take a look at the regional headlines and I'll be joined by a guest to dig further into some of those key stories. Don't go anywhere.
The global defense industry plays a vital role in ensuring national security. In Turkey, companies in this sector strengthen domestic production and enhance military independence.
ISA-based radar, Murat radar. This is fully digital radar. This is new for world. Aselsan today, Turkish technology leader and global technology provider.
Yaptığınız atışa hazır. 3, 2, 1, ateş. Hedef imha edildi.
I'm Nuray Mustafa. This is One on One.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. Let's go to the stories in the region now. And first, we're going to discuss the reports that Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has blocked French President Emmanuel Macron's proposed Armenia to Turkey crossing following consultations with Baku. Well, joining me now in the studio is Sultan Zahedov, leading advisor at Air Center. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So why did Erdogan block this request from Macron, and have we had these reports verified?
Well, indeed, Recep Tayyip Erdogan did not give a green light for the crossing, for Macron's crossing Armenian-Turkish border from Armenia. We know that the borders have been closed for over the 30 years. And perhaps Emmanuel Macron had a plan to make a politically symbolic gesture by traveling to Turkey from Armenia through the closed borders. And the block took place after following the consultations with Azerbaijan, and probably Macron's intention was to elevate his diplomatic weight amid international criticism of his foreign policy failures. We know that there were French foreign politics in a number of regions, including Africa, Middle East. The Caucasus itself has failed due to the number of reasons, and first and foremost because of some geopolitical ambitions of France to let's say to follow the policies of so-called grandeur, which means it's about making France great again. And other than that, we know that the South Caucasus politics of France has not been in line with the interest of the regional stakeholders, including it has been the more favoring Armenia's interest so far, and therefore the French politics in South Caucasus so far has not yielded any results for this country. And consequently, what we see is that the Macron's so-called intentions to let's say to play a major role in the Caucasus region, in the Mediterranean region, have not yielded the results he expected. But this is due to the number of reasons. First of all, this bloc once again is an indication of the fact that Azerbaijan and Turkey coordinate their actions in the region, and Turkey, as a strategic partner and ally of Azerbaijan, takes into consideration the interests of Azerbaijan as well. And even though Turkey intends to normalize relationship with Armenia and open the borders, but nevertheless, this normalization is also linked to the normalization and peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and which has been a long-standing principle in the regional politics of Turkey. So therefore, I believe if we take all these, let's say, factors into the consideration, the block of Macron's crossing Armenian-Turkish border is not a surprise, and I believe the French politics led by Macron should recalibrate its South Caucasus politics and make sure that the policy it pursues takes into consideration the regional stakeholders and especially Azerbaijan-Turkey strategic alignment, which is key.
But French government officials and Azerbaijani government officials have been having conversations recently, haven't they? Could this not have been an opportunity?
With respect to, I mean, having negotiations, having discussions doesn't mean that there are no certain, let's say, issues which should be dealt with. And we know that some institutions in Europe, they have been, let's say, including the European Parliament, they have adopted some resolutions which do not reflect the reality in the South Caucasus. And of course, European Union, certain European Union members, including Netherlands and Belgium, they have adopted similar resolutions in their parliament. And we know that both chambers of the French parliament, they have adopted resolutions condemning Azerbaijan without any, let's say, grounded reasons. And I believe the Pandora box here is the Armenian diaspora in France, and we should take into consideration the fact that Macron and his establishment, they do have very close connections with them. And what we see is now that Armenian diaspora in many places, including in France, they are trying to somehow torpedo the peace process between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and therefore the connections of the establishment, the political establishment in France, including Macron, with that diaspora, might not lead to the positive outcomes in the region, and hence France must recalibrate its politics vis-à-vis South Caucasus, and also vis-à-vis Turkey as well, I believe, because between Turkey and France there have been certain, let's say, issues which created tension in the past, which should be dealt with.
So Armenia's foreign minister has described the dialogue between Armenia and Turkey as excellent. What do you make of that?
Well, we know that that the normalization process between Turkey and Armenia started in 2021, just right after the Second Karabakh War, and both countries appointed envoys to restart a dialogue and the normalization process. Since then, there have been a number of rounds of negotiations held in Vienna and other places. For example, in Vienna, they agreed to open the borders for the citizens of the third countries and to allow the transfer of the transport of the cargo flights. But nevertheless, there have been certain progress in these negotiations, but nevertheless, we know that the full breakthrough was not achieved due to the number of the reasons. And first and foremost, once again, Turkey links this normalization process. It doesn't look at it in vacuum, I mean, not in isolation from the normalization process between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Of course, there is between Azerbaijan and Armenia normalization process is ongoing, and we already live in peace for more than 9 months. But therefore, there are a number of challenges on the horizon, and of course, one of them is the amendment to the Armenian constitution, where there is a reference to the Armenian Declaration of Independence, which says that, which reflects the claims to Azerbaijani territories. And other than that, we know that Armenia is facing elections, parliamentary elections in June, and the outcomes of these elections matter as well. Who will be in the power after these elections matters as well, because this outcome can dramatically shift the foreign policy of Armenia and thereby the regional geopolitical dynamics as well.
And what about the other developments in other sectors, such as transit, for example?
Well, it's a huge development right there, because we know that during his visit in Kazakhstan in October 2025, President Ilham Aliyev announced the lift on the ban of transit goods from Azerbaijan to Armenia. And we know that for over 30 years this was impossible due to their conflict. And since that announcement, Azerbaijan, there was a direct, through Georgia, there was a direct, let's say, transportation of goods between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And at the same time, Azerbaijan facilitated the transit of some other goods, including grain from Kazakhstan, fertilizers from Russia, through its territories to Armenia. This is definitely a milestone, let's say, achievement, and it indicates the fact that Azerbaijan is not just committed to peace on paper. Azerbaijan is taking practical, real steps, and it also denotes that the peace process between Azerbaijan and Armenia is not just diplomatic, but it's also functional and operational. And we can call it economic dimension of the peace process, which is very important, because you have to, just signing the peace treaty might not be enough. You need to, let's say, open up the communication lines. You need to, let's say, trade and engaged in economic cooperation in order to deepen the ties and integration between the countries. So how it happened between Germany and France, which have been fighting each other for 70 years, and then all of a sudden, thanks to the Schuman Declaration, opening up of the borders and economic cooperation, the sustainable peace was achieved, even though they signed the official Treaty of Friendship in 1963 in Élysée. So we, on one hand, we are trying to accelerate the signing of the peace treaty, and on the other hand, we are trying to make it practical by, let's say, by facilitating the shipment of goods, aluminium, grain, and petroleum products to Armenia.
Okay, so it seems quite a mixed picture then. We've got progress in some areas, challenges in another. So what would you say are the key indicators to watch in terms of how normalization is going across the region?
Well, first of all, the key indicators, as you already mentioned, is the fact that that there is a ongoing trade between countries, Azerbaijan and Armenia. And it's not just exporting goods from Azerbaijan to Armenia, it's also Armenia exporting goods to Azerbaijan, which also happened a couple of months ago. And at the same time, the key is confidence building measures, because sometimes economic and trade is not enough, and societies should, let's say, must get to know each other. The people-to-people contacts are important with that respect. And so therefore, here the track to diplomacy is a matter of paramount importance, and we know that in the recent months there have been a number of visits, there are mutual visits by Armenian and Azerbaijani civil society members, and this is definitely a huge step right there. And then at the same time, of course, the peace process itself, the political track itself, which is waiting for just the signing of the peace treaty. And of course here the parliamentary elections in Armenia should be taken into consideration, as if, for example, the revanchists, some oppositional revanchist fractions come to power, they might be having another course vis-a-vis Azerbaijan. They might be, let's say, wanting to derail the previous track with respect to peace, and in that case the current transformation of the entire South Caucasus from confrontation to stability might be in real danger.
Thank you very much. Obviously, we don't have anyone from the French Parliament nor the Armenian diaspora to respond, but thank you as always for joining us on the programme.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. So stay right there. We are going to get the rest of the regional headlines as the second day of Saha Expo is underway in Istanbul, showcasing the latest innovations in Turkish defence and aerospace. With $8 billion in new contracts expected, the event highlights Turkey's growing self-sufficiency and global export reach. Nuray Mustafa has more.
The second day of the Saha Expo 2026 exhibition held in Istanbul continues with events and presentation in the fields of defense, aviation and space. The exhibition is attracting significant international interest. According to official information, Turkey expects approximately $8 billion worth of the contracts to be signed at the event. The country currently exports more than 230 products to 185 countries. The Saha Expo has grown considerably since 2018. At that time, there were 180 companies, whereas today the event is much larger. This year, around 200 delegations are participating. The exhibition is organized according to the Green Corridor principle. Major companies are positioned in central areas, while their partner firms are located around them. Saha Istanbul has more than 1,300 members. The organization plays an important role in strengthening industrial cooperation. Over the past 20 years, local production in Turkey has increased significantly, exceeding 880%. The country now manufactures products across land, air, naval and space sectors. Turkey produces both major platforms and their components, exporting them abroad. Last year, export reached $10.5 billion.
%80'den fazla dışarıya bağımlı bir
We have transitioned from a defense industry that was over 80% dependent on foreign sources to one that today possesses more than 80% domestic and national capabilities. We are speaking of a sector with a turnover exceeding $20 billion, which as of last year realized $10.5 billion in exports. We are currently the world's 11th largest exporter, and we hope to rank among the top 10 in the short term. While the defense industry is undoubtedly vital for security, it is equally critical for an independent foreign policy. This sector contributes significantly to Turkey's overall independence, as a country cannot maintain an independent foreign policy without a self-sufficient defense industry.
The exhibition is also marked by several new innovations. The Uran 105mm self-propelled howitzer was presented for the first time. The system has been developed based on the engineering experience gained from the Boran howitzer. Boran system was previously used by the Turkish armed forces and was exported to Bangladesh in 2024. This marked Turkey's first ever howitzer export. The Uran system is more mobile and faster. It operates on a 4x4 platform, has a firing range of 18 km and is capable of firing 12 rounds per minute. There are the latest updates from the exhibition so far. Saha Expo 2026 continue on its second day with the new technologies, new contracts and expanding international cooperation. Nuray Mustafa, Abbas Hacıyev for A News, Istanbul, Turkey.
Well, Turkey has unveiled a new long-range ballistic missile at the Saha Defence Exhibition in Istanbul as it continues to expand its domestic defence industry. The Yıldırım Han missile was introduced by the Ministry's Research and Development Centre. Officials say it has a reported range of 6,000 kilometres and can reach speeds of Mach 25. It is powered by 4 rocket propulsion engines and uses liquid rocket fuel. The National Defence Minister said major investment in research have helped strengthen the country's defence industry. Now, the Iranian Red Crescent Society says it's stepping up efforts to document what it describes as violations of international humanitarian law during the recent conflict with Israel and the United States. As legal scrutiny grows, the focus is shifting from the battlefield to questions of accountability. Taraz Shiralilu has more from Tehran.
The Secretary General of the Iranian Red Crescent Society, IRCS, Maysam Afshar, said it has documented the violations of international humanitarian law during the Israeli and U.S. war on Iran. He said that IRCS has sent 35 official communications to the relevant international bodies protesting to the deliberate targeting of the civilian areas as well as medical centers. Speaking at a press briefing on Wednesday, he added that the international humanitarian organizations visited Iran during the war and had field observation of the non-military areas destroyed in the air raids. The IRCS president, Pir Hossein Kolivand, also referred to the visit last week to Iran by the president of International Committee of Red Cross, ICRC, to have first-hand information of the scale of strikes on capital Tehran, which was targeted more than 500 times. Kolivand announced that Iranian and foreign law experts will meet online next week to review aspects of violations of international humanitarian law in the war. The meeting will be held as part of the Crescent Week in Iran, coinciding the World Red Cross and Red Crescent Day, which is celebrated on 8th of May every year. It was also announced that the Iranian Red Crescent Society broke many records in terms of relief operations and missions and recruiting volunteers, while 4 aid workers were killed and 61 more wounded in the war. Taraz Shiralilu from Iranian Red Crescent Society for A News.
Water and energy security are becoming some of the biggest challenges facing Central Asia. New forecasts warn the region could soon face severe shortages, forcing governments to look for long-term solutions. Our correspondent reports from Almaty.
Central Asia is moving closer to a major water and energy crisis. According to a report by the Eurasian Fund for Stabilization and Development, the region could face severe water shortages by 2040, while electricity demand is expected to double by 2050. Countries across the region are already facing winter electricity shortages and relying on expensive fuel imports, while water supplies from glaciers continue to decline as demand rises. The United Nations had also previously warned that water shortages in Central Asia could triple within the next 15 years. The situation is also being complicated by Afghanistan's Kosh-Tepe Canal project, which could divert up to a quarter of the annual flow of the Amu Darya River, increasing pressure on water supplies in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. And against this backdrop, regional officials met in Tashkent for another round of talks on the construction of the Kambarata 1 hydropower plant on the Naran River. The project is being described as a strategic step toward strengthening both energy and water security in Central Asia. According to estimates, the plant could generate around 6,000 gigawatt hours of electricity annually, equivalent to roughly 40% of Kyrgyzstan's current energy supply. And experts say the projects like this may become critical as the region faces growing pressure from climate change, rising consumption and declining water reserves. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Tbilisi has announced a major push to position itself as the region's essential transit corridor, with new railway, road, airport and port projects. Our correspondent Nini Nikolaishvili has the story.
The centerpiece of Georgia's ambitions is the Anaklia deep-water port on the Black Sea. Alongside it, a rebuilt national railway, expressways completed by 2030, and a brand new Tbilisi International Airport by 2031, capable of handling 18 million passengers per year. Prime Minister Irakli Kabakhidze presented this as Georgia's bid to become a genuine hub between Europe and Asia. Parliament Speaker Shawa Papashvili added that whatever investor comes on board, the Georgian state will hold a 51% controlling stake in Anaklia. The problem is that Anaklia has been stalled for 6 years. Its original American-backed developer walked away in 2020 and no replacement has been found since. Opposition politician Irakli Kopradze put it bluntly. The government drove out Western investors, failed to bring in anyone else, and neither serious capital nor Western partners trusted enough to commit. The government says that negotiations are ongoing. What makes all of this more pressing is what is happening next door. In Yerevan this week, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen signed a new connectivity partnership with Armenia, praising its Crossroads of Peace plan as a genuine bridge between Europe, South Caucasus and Central Asia. In Baku, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaya Kallas met President Aliyev, calling Azerbaijan a reliable energy partner and signaling a deeper structured relationship ahead. Azerbaijan gas is already flowing to Germany and Austria. Brussels is actively rewiring its South Caucasus relationships, but Georgia is not part of that conversation right now. Relations with the EU have been frozen since Tbilisi passed legislation Brussels compared to Russian-style foreign agent laws, and there is no sign of movement on either side. That leaves Georgia in an uncomfortable position. Ambitious infrastructure plans, but no political partnership to anchor them. Good roads and new port can still attract trade, but without closer ties with its biggest potential partner, Georgia risks being a corridor that others root around. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
It's time to go to a quick break now, and when I come back, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Don't go anywhere.
figuras armenias en Argentina. Y ofrece por plata y es para los gobiernos. Un tipo muy piola. No, money from Armenia from Russia. Group of Russian Armenians. People who are financial days, some rich Armenians, they live in Russia. Pashinyan lo puso preso. Pashinyan is not protecting neocontrolar. The Armenian game is Russia. No con Pashinyan mismo, pero...
Que remuevan a Pashinyan.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. Challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. One important note to Fierce. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv, Washington, London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul for A News.
Hello and welcome back to Daybreak on A News. Now let's get the top stories that are making the headlines for the hour. President Trump signals possible Iran deal amid ongoing talks in Strait of Hormuz tensions. Israeli airstrikes hit southern Beirut for the first time since last month's ceasefire. And Russia wants diplomatic missions to evacuate staff ahead of possible strike on Ukraine. All right, let's take another look at what is making the front pages this morning. And we're going to begin with Reuters, who are leading with a story on the Eurovision Song Contest. Preparations are underway for the 70th anniversary edition. Here we have the host city, Vienna. And this was always going to be tainted with controversy due to Israel's participation. Police in the host city, as we can see here, are bracing themselves for protests, including blockades and disruption attempts. This year, 5 national broadcasters, including Spain's and Ireland's, are boycotting due to Israel's participation and the war in Gaza. Now, the European Union Broadcasting Union, who organised the contest, say it's a non-political cultural event, but we've got that precedent there that in 2022, Russia was banned from the competition following the country's invasion of Ukraine. Now, the grand final is set to take place next week, so I'm sure we'll get more developments from that this week and next week. Now, we are going to head over to the BBC now for a heartwarming story from this region. A 90-year-old woman from Jersey has been reunited with the descendants of a former Soviet prisoner of war who her family hid during the Nazis' occupation of the Channel Islands. He is here in an old picture which she kept for all of these years, and she knew him as Dulce Le Breton. She knew him as Uncle Tom, and she said this was her main memory of the war, having him read to her, having him look after her. But after the liberation of the Channel Islands, Tom was sent back to the USSR, and the family did not hear from him since. Until now, as BBC Russian and BBC Uzbek have tracked down his family in the far east of Uzbekistan and arranged a video call between them and Dulce. And after learning of the story, Uzbekistan has posthumously awarded John and Phyllis Le Breton the Order of Friendship, one of the highest state awards for their courage and compassion during the war. So really a nice story there. It's on the website and on social media. I'd really recommend you take a look because it certainly made me smile. Now, we are going to return to the top story and we are going to take a look at A News. We have a live page running on the latest developments in the Middle East. Now, President Trump said he had very good talks with Iran, adding that it's very possible we'll make a deal. Iran's foreign ministry said a US proposal to end the war is still under review. And overnight, Israel struck Beirut for the first time since the ceasefire with Hezbollah. Now, we had reports in the last hour of a drone attack in southern Lebanon, which has injured 4 Israeli soldiers. In the past few minutes, we've been finding out more that one seems to be seriously injured, but of course, there'll be more developments throughout the day on this live page, so stay across that for the latest. But for now, we are going to go to this report for more.
President Donald Trump said on Wednesday he expects the war in Iran to end quickly as the United States seeks a deal over Tehran's nuclear program and the Strait of Hormuz. He also said that the US had held very good talks with Iran over the previous 24 hours, adding that a deal between the two sides was very possible.
All of a sudden, no, they want to make a deal badly, and we'll see if we get there. If we get there, they can't have nuclear weapons. You know, it's very simple, but what's not to submit? So they had a Navy with 159 ships, and now every ship is blown to pieces and lying at the bottom of the water. They had an Air Force, lots of planes, and they don't have any planes. They don't have any anti-aircraft. They don't have any radar left. Their missiles are mostly decimated. They have some. They have probably 18, 19%, but not a lot by comparison to what they had. And their leaders are all dead. So I think we won.
His comments came as reports emerged from US media that Washington and Tehran could be nearing a one-page deal to end their war. The memo reportedly has 14 points and, according to US news outlet Axios, could serve as the basis for wider nuclear talks. The measures under discussion include suspending Iran's uranium enrichment, lifting sanctions, and restoring free transit through the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian officials say the proposal is still being reviewed. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai said Tehran will study the offer carefully before responding through Pakistani mediators. Senior Iranian lawmakers also warned that Iran is ready to respond if tensions rise further, unless the United States makes major concessions. Despite ongoing talks, President Trump warned military action could resume at a much higher intensity if negotiations fail. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister says Israel remains in full coordination with Washington, adding that he speaks with President Trump almost daily and that both leaders agree all enriched uranium must be removed from Iran.
We share common objectives, and the most important objective is the removal of enriched material from Iran, all of the enriched material, and the dismantling of Iran's enrichment capabilities. President Trump believes he can achieve this one way or another. However, we are prepared for any scenario. And that is the directive I have given to the IDF and our security agencies as well. Israel is stronger than ever. Iran and its proxies are weaker than ever.
In the meantime, oil markets remain highly sensitive to developments between Washington and Tehran, with any rise in tensions around the Strait of Hormuz likely to push energy prices higher and add pressure to the global economy.
An Israeli airstrike has hit the southern suburbs of Beirut for the first time since last month's ceasefire, raising fresh concerns over the stability of the truce with Hezbollah. The escalation comes as tensions continue across the region despite ongoing diplomatic efforts to contain the conflict.
Tensions remain high across the Middle East as Israel continues its operations in Lebanon. Airstrikes hit southern Beirut on Wednesday, marking the first attack on the Lebanese capital since the ceasefire came into effect last month. The escalation comes amid wider diplomatic efforts to ease regional tensions, including ongoing US-Iran negotiations. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the target was a commander from the Radwan force, an elite unit of the group. In a joint statement with Defense Minister Israel Katz, he said the operation was intended to prevent future attacks on Israeli troops and communities. Israeli media report the commander was killed, though neither the Israeli military nor Hezbollah has confirmed his death. Earlier, Israel issued evacuation warnings for several villages north of the Litani River, raising concerns of a possible expansion of military operations deeper into Lebanese territory. Lebanon's Prime Minister Nawaf Salam says it is still too early for high-level talks, with diplomatic channels between the two sides remaining limited.
Well, joining me now in the studio to discuss the latest developments in the Middle East is Arthur Block, Editor-in-Chief of the Liberum. Thank you for being with us.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, what do we know so far about those overnight attacks on Beirut?
Well, it's a pattern. It keeps on happening. Hezbollah fires some rockets or shoots at soldiers in the south, and then Israel retaliates in the west, Bekaa Valley, or in Beirut. It keeps on happening because Hezbollah refuses to put their arms down and to sit and to talk peace. Mm-hmm. They're threatening even the Lebanese state by if you continue on that path, you will see what the consequence will be. So it's a complicated situation, to say the least.
And obviously we had that ceasefire potentially in name only between Israel and Lebanon. How tangible was that was going to hold?
Well, we had multiple ceasefires in the past years. And as I said, Hezbollah actually resists a ceasefire because their raison d'etre is fighting a battle against Israel. If there's peace, then they become obsolete, and they know that. I wrote an article recently elaborating that this is their last stand. If there's no future for them in Lebanon anymore. Of course, it's also connected to Iran, who are basically funding them and telling them what to do. And they have nothing to do with Lebanon anymore. They're just resisting the Lebanese state at this moment, and the people are paying the price. Not only the Shia community, but the whole of Lebanon.
And obviously we've got these two parallel conflicts almost. Yeah. How real is the chance that we're going to see progress while this is still going on with Iran?
Well, the Lebanese government made it clear that there will be more negotiations. I think next week there will be high-level talks spread over 2 days in Washington. Initially, the Lebanese president would meet Bibi Netanyahu. That's postponed for the time being, but the talks are continuing. The path of peace, has been set out, and there's no other option for Lebanon. We cannot afford to be in a continuous state of war, which has been the case in the past, let's say, 3 to 4 years. It has to end. We cannot fight somebody else's war in our country. I ask because I'm also Lebanese myself.
And where do you think that turning point is going to be? As you say, there's been several ceasefires over recent years.
Well, in the end, there has to become a solution because the people, especially who live in the south, they are all displaced in the country. There's hundreds of thousands of displaced people, and they are living everywhere across Lebanon. So there can only be a solution. The solution is not a military one, but a diplomatic one. And don't forget that Lebanon is a state of war since the early 80s with Israel. It's more than 40 years, imagine. And because of Iran, who was basically deciding the rules for Hezbollah and saying what they can and cannot do and can say, they prevented us as a country from talking to Israel. Now, you cannot solve a conflict on the battlefield. You have to talk, sit and talk, and that's what's going to happen. It already started a couple of weeks ago. And we are hopeful that there will be, I don't think a breakthrough, but there will be some kind of feasible solution in the nearby future because it comes with a heavy price.
And if we look to the wider conflict now, Iran says a US proposal to end the war is still being considered after reports the two sides could be close to an agreement. What do you make of this?
Well, you hear conflicting reports coming out of Washington. You know, one moment Trump says we're almost done, there's a deal, and then Iran says no. So I think also it's unclear who's in charge in Iran. I mean, there's completely, the president of Iran wants a diplomatic solution, but the Revolutionary Guard wants to continue fighting. So it's a bit of the same problem as we have in Lebanon. It is, a lot of damage has been done. And if the regime does not make a deal in Iran, then it's game over. And the country could erupt in civil clashes. Everything can happen. Because there's many Iranians who are also not suffering and paying the price for what's happening because of that regime. That's a complication.
There's the nuclear negotiation aspect to this too, isn't there?
Yeah, listen, it's a very complex status quo at the moment. When America went in, don't know if they have reached all the goals, but you hear talks about enriched uranium has to be, I mean, it's difficult to make sense of it at this moment because every day you hear something else. And I'm curious what's going to happen in the coming weeks, but I think the path of war is not feasible for both parties. So I expect there will be a solution in the coming week or two.
And on the ground in Tehran, how are Iranians reacting to this? We've got Trump threatening renewed violence if Iran doesn't agree to a deal.
The paradox here is that many Iranians are actually stating online begging Trump to continue. So if you stop now, then the regime is still there and we keep on suffering. I mean, it's not it's always difficult to get, if in a war situation, what is the right narrative, because all parties they use propaganda basically to make their point. But I expect that, you know, don't forget in January there was the uprising in Tehran and in all other parts of the country, and it looks like the people have had enough of this regime. But we will see what's going to happen. It's difficult. I don't have a crystal ball, but I expect there will be some kind of breakthrough in the nearby future.
Is that regime change, or is that?
Yeah, I think there will be a regime change.
Really, even after all of these months of conflict, you think that's still a possibility?
Well, I think if you look in Iran in the past, let's say, 20 years, there have been many uprisings, all against the regime, and the regime has. It's not a kind regime or any for the people. I mean, people are frustrated. The economy has collapsed. There's a hyperinflation, and if people get hungry, they get angry. It's as simple as that. Same you can say for Lebanon. At a certain point, people are fed up and they say, "Well, this is enough. Now we have to stop." And I hope hope that they have a good future, but it looks a bit grim at the moment.
As you say, no one has a crystal ball.
Basically, it's so complicated. It might as well be this weekend that Trump announced there's a breakthrough. But then you can argue what kind of breakthrough? The regime will stay in place. And what about the people that went on the streets? And don't forget about the 20 to 30,000 people killed in the demonstration in January. So what's going to happen to that? Are they going to tighten their control over the country again? It's difficult to say. It makes it also interesting to analyze and to look at.
Absolutely. I'm sure I'll have you back later on in these coming weeks, but thank you very much for joining us and providing your analysis. Cheers. Now, as battlefield tensions escalate across Ukraine, Russia has issued evacuation warnings to foreign embassies in Kyiv as preparations are underway for Victory Day.
Russia warned foreign embassies and international organisations in Kyiv on Wednesday to evacuate personnel, saying retaliatory strikes could target the Ukrainian capital if Victory Day events in Moscow are disrupted.
A note with the following content was sent to all diplomatic missions accredited with the Foreign Ministry and to representations of international organisations. I quote, "On May 4th, 2026, the Russian Defence Ministry issued an official statement in connection with threats by the Kiev authorities to strike Moscow on a date sacred to all Russians, Victory Day in the Great Patriotic War. The Russian Foreign Ministry strongly urges the authorities of your country, the leadership of your organization, to treat this statement with the utmost responsibility and to ensure the advance evacuation from the city of Kiev of personnel of diplomatic and other missions, as well as citizens, in view of the inevitability of a retaliatory strike by the armed forces of the Russian Federation against Kiev, including centers of decision-making, should the Kiev regime attempt to carry out their criminal terrorist plans.
The warning comes as fighting continues, despite rival ceasefire proposals linked to Russia's May 9th commemorations. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russian forces violated Kyiv's proposed truce more than 1,800 times within hours of it taking effect, with attacks continuing along the front line and in civilian areas. Ukraine's foreign minister, Andriy Sybiha, meanwhile, accused Moscow of focusing on securing the parade rather than advancing peace efforts. As clashes intensified, a Russian strike hit a kindergarten in Ukraine's northeastern Sumy region, killing 2 people. Officials said no children were inside the building at the time of the attack. The United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission says Russian attacks across 14 Ukrainian regions since last Friday have killed at least 70 civilians and wounded more than 500 others. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry says its forces captured 2 settlements in the Donetsk and Sumy regions over the past 24 hours, while also carrying out strikes on Ukrainian military positions, drone facilities, and energy infrastructure across 141 locations. Moscow further claimed its air defense systems intercepted 571 Ukrainian drones, while the Black Sea Fleet destroyed 4 unmanned boats. Ukraine's military, meanwhile, reported 177 clashes along frontline areas and said its forces targeted Russian command centers, assembly points, and air defense systems.
President Trump is heading to Beijing next week for a 2-day visit, with efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz expected to be a key focus of his talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
US President Donald Trump is set to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing next week during a 2-day visit, his first trip to China in 8 years. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the 2 leaders would discuss Iran and urged Beijing to use its influence to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz to international shipping. The strait has been closed since the outbreak of the US-Israeli conflict with Iran, disrupting energy flows and raising costs for manufacturers. Before the conflict, around 1/5 of global oil and liquefied natural gas moved through the Strait of Hormuz, with much of it headed to Asia. China has a central role because it is the world's biggest crude importer and has been the main buyer of Iranian oil in recent years. That gives Beijing leverage over Tehran, but also leaves it exposed to the energy shock caused by the closure. Diplomacy has intensified ahead of Trump's visit. Iran's foreign minister met his Chinese counterpart in Beijing, where China backed efforts to ease tensions and called for safe passage through the strait. Trump has also paused a US effort to escort ships through the route, citing progress on a possible deal with Tehran. But the crisis is also feeding into US-China tensions. Washington has sanctioned Chinese refineries and shipping companies over purchases of Iranian crude. Beijing has invoked its anti-sanctions law and told companies not to comply with the US measures. Beijing is expected to raise its objections to US arms sales to Taiwan, while Washington is likely to press China on trade barriers and industrial policy. The 2 sides remain divided over technology controls, with the US limiting access to advanced chips and China tightening its hold over critical minerals used in high-tech manufacturing. This makes the summit not only a test of diplomacy over Hormuz, but also a wider test of whether Washington and Beijing can contain their growing rivalry.
Teachers, labour unions and indigenous groups have staged protests in Bolivia's capital, La Paz, demanding changes in domestic policies.
Police in Bolivia clashed with protesting teachers near the presidential palace in La Paz as demonstrations over education, labor and land reforms intensified across the capital. Protesters threw tomatoes and firecrackers at officers who responded with tear gas to disperse the crowds. Teachers say they are rejecting plans to decentralize education and are demanding higher salaries and more teaching positions.
We categorically reject the decentralization of education. We demand respect for the political constitution of the state, a single free public education system, which must be funded by the state and must also be guaranteed by the state.
Bolivia's main labor federation has also continued an indefinite strike and symbolically occupied the labor ministry. At the same time, indigenous and peasant groups arrived in La Paz after marching more than 1,100 kilometers over 29 days, demanding the repeal of Law 1720, which they say threatens collective land rights and encourages deforestation. The government says the law is designed to improve access to credit, but officials accuse some protest leaders and organizations of attempting to destabilize the country.
There is clearly a destabilization attempt. We have exhausted every way and opportunity for dialogue. We have shown great openness to discuss all aspects of what this government is proposing to the country in terms of economic, environmental, and legal security matters. Some organizations and union leaders have accepted this, and as a result, they are not mobilizing.
Officials say further talks with social groups are expected in the coming days as authorities try to ease tensions in the capital.
Health authorities across Europe are monitoring passengers from a cruise ship linked to a deadly hantavirus outbreak. The vessel is now heading to Spain after several evacuations and 3 confirmed deaths.
The cruise ship MV Hondius, hit by a deadly hantavirus outbreak, has left waters off Cape Verde and is heading to Tenerife in Spain's Canary Islands. The vessel has nearly 150 people on board and is expected to arrive within 3 days. 3 people, a Dutch couple and a German national, have died during the outbreak. According to the World Health Organization, 8 people are suspected to have contracted the virus, with 3 confirmed through laboratory testing. Spanish authorities say the 14 Spanish passengers on board will be quarantined in a military hospital in Madrid for up to 45 days, depending on possible exposure to the virus. Other passengers without symptoms are expected to return to their home countries after the ship docks. 2 seriously ill passengers were evacuated from the vessel and flown towards Europe for specialist treatment. During the transfer, 1 aircraft carrying patients to the Netherlands was denied permission to refuel in Morocco. The plane was later redirected to Gran Canaria, where officials reported a problem with a patient's life support system while awaiting another aircraft. Health authorities are now investigating how the virus spread on board the ship, which began its voyage in Argentina and travelled through remote parts of the South Atlantic.
Cuba has condemned recent US remarks hinting at possible military action, calling them dangerous and a violation of international law. Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez blamed decades of US sanctions for the country's deepening economic crisis. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the situation in Cuba is unacceptable and signaled possible action without any details. Rising pressure from Washington, including limits on oil supplies, has worsened fuel shortages and triggered widespread blackouts across the island. You're watching Daybreak on A News. Stay with us for more.
world business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Welcome back, you're watching Daybreak. Now, global supply chains and rising geopolitical competition are increasingly shaping the agenda for major economies. Against this backdrop, G7 ministers have been meeting to reassess how critical resources are secured and protected. Here's more.
Welcome to this day in Europe, where the Group of Seven sees critical minerals not just as a trade issue, but as a matter of economic security and resilience. Meeting in Paris, G7 trade ministers focused on securing supply chains for rare earths and other strategic materials that are essential for EVs, semiconductors, defense systems, and advanced technologies. The meeting took place amid growing concern in Western capitals over China's dominance in the mining, processing, and refining of critical minerals, and fears that economic dependencies could be weaponized during future geopolitical disputes. In a joint statement, ministers warned against what they described as economic coercion and pledged to reduce strategic vulnerabilities linked to concentrated supply chains and non-market practices. But the meeting also unfolded against a backdrop of rising trade tensions between Europe and the U.S. President Donald Trump threatened new tariffs on European-made cars and continues to push allies to reduce reliance on Chinese supply chains while simultaneously pressuring trading partners over market access and industrial subsidies. That has complicated efforts to present a fully united Western economic front, particularly as European governments try to balance transatlantic ties with protecting their own industrial competitiveness. French Trade Minister Nicolas Forissier said the goal is to ensure G7 countries are not held hostage by nations that dominate key resources. That's a clear reference to Beijing's influence over global rare earth markets. Officials also discussed closer coordination on stockpiling, investment screening, and industrial policy, alongside reforms to strengthen the World Trade Organization and counter industrial overcapacity. The discussions reflect a broader shift now taking place across Europe and the G7, where trade policy, industrial strategy, and national security are becoming increasingly interconnected. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
And finally this morning, King Charles and Queen Camilla hosted a royal garden party at Buckingham Palace on Wednesday. They were joined by senior members of the royal family, including the Princess Royal and the Duke of Edinburgh. The royals greeted guests from across the country to highlight community service and voluntary work, with several recipients of the King's Award for Voluntary Service among those invited.
Yes, brilliant, thank you.
That's all we have time for this morning. Thank you for being with me across the morning and watching Daybreak. I'll be back tomorrow with all of your latest global and regional headlines. Bye for now.